All right. Hello, everyone. Important episode here today. By request, we are going to be talking about vitamin A and specifically the toxicity or the supposed toxicity of vitamin A. Joining me today is Tony. Tony is a fellow distributor in this business. He's very knowledgeable, and I'm excited to jump into this. So, Tony, what's up? What have you heard about vitamin A toxicity, and what do you think?
How's it going, Ryan? First of all, I'm just happy to be here. And, I would challenge anybody who wants to talk about how toxic vitamin A is to Google vitamin A related deaths. And that's going to be a great start into how toxic vitamin A is. And I would say that vitamin A has been said recently, it's a trend like anything else. It's been said to be very dangerous. And I have an agreement with that in a sense because vitamin A can potentially be very dangerous. And when I say that, I mean that because over 50% of people in the world are critically deficient in vitamin A. So there's more people suffering from problems of not having vitamin A. And you can't show me a single instance of someone dying as a result of being exposed to too much vitamin A. So I would say that there is a problem here, but it's definitely not in the direction that people are going. And unfortunately, the internet is an echo chamber. So as soon as one person tries to create some new content, it becomes an echo chamber of 1,000 different people clinging to the same information and repeating the same information, whether it's true or not, simply for the sake of having more content. People try to jump onto the bandwagon and say something's bad. None of these people are independent researchers. None of them are clinical pathologists. None of them are coaches that can produce results. And not a single one of these people can show us a single case study of anyone having ever died. If you Google vitamin related deaths, period, there's one instance of an 89-year-old man in the UK dying from a vitamin D overdose. And him being 89 years old, us not knowing what kind of vitamins that he was taking, who's to say what the circumstances around that were? But when you have something it's indisputable that any vitamin, the word vitamin comes from the English word vital, the Latin word vitus, meaning of life. You cannot live without these vitamins. We have 100 years of research backing this up. Every single vitamin is 100% essential. Without vitamin A, and as you know, there's plenty of research showing that without vitamin A, when the diet is restricted from vitamin A, serious health complications and death occur within weeks. What they have against us in this instance is one case study of an Antarctic exploration, in which I'll be getting into in a bit, on how crazy this study actually is, how crazy this case study actually is, and how many different extremes under different conditions had to be met for this to even take place. So they're pulling one instance of people in starvation eating nothing but the highest concentrated content material of vitamin A in the entire world, which is a polar bear's liver, who, by the way, a polar bear is a master at absorbing vitamin A and storing it. So you're eating the most potent source of vitamin A in the world in freezing conditions under starvation measures. And you're going to take that one instance and you're going to say that this thing is toxic when everybody in the world, you take it in half of these people are critically deficient in this vitamin. So now we have people saying that you shouldn't be eating liver. Mind you, these same people probably had to go back to their Instagram and delete their posts from 6 months ago where they were saying that liver was God's gift to the world, because these trends tend to accelerate. And as you remember, most of the people now that are carnivores, their names, carnivore coach Dallas or whatever their name is. That's not a real person. I'm not going to call names out, but carnivore coach Dave was vegan coach Dave 5 years ago, because that's how these people make their livings. We don't make our livings with lies. If we wanted to get paid to lie, we would have gotten into politics. We instead make our livings by helping people. And we don't get into trends, we don't get into fads. Our information is getting upwards of 60, 70 years old in some cases, sometimes over 100 years old. But we have case studies. We have people that have lived and people that have died based on our information or the lack thereof. So to say that vitamin A is dangerous in any form, we're going to get into that today. And by the end of the day, you'll realize all of the facts, you'll have all of the truth, and you won't even have to make your own decision based on it, because you're going to see that there's never any proof that it was dangerous in the first place. And the proof that it's always been safe is surmounting.
Yep, I agree with everything there, and we are going to dive deep into that today. But let's give a little bit of an overview. So, vitamin A is, first of all, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. There's four fat-soluble vitamins: D, E, A, and K. I like to think of them as DEEK, and each one of them has multiple different possible forms. Vitamin A is particularly complicated and weird. It's a weird vitamin because it's actually in at least two distinct categories. First of all, you have animal vitamin A, which is called retinol. And there's a bunch of different retinoids and
Hmm.
different synthetic versions of retinol. So it's not even just one thing, but we're just calling it retinol for now. And then there's the carotenes, most famous of which are beta carotene, which are plant vitamin A. I honestly think they should be named differently, like maybe A1 and A2 or something like that, because they are very different. First of all, the carotenes or the carotenoids are poorly converted. And the numbers differ on this a little bit, but you're going to see in studies and different governments say it's anywhere from 3.6 to 28 times to 1. So somewhere between 4 and 28 times is the amount of beta carotene that you need to eat to convert to 1 unit of retinol. And beta carotene is the one that converts the best. So in the best case scenario here, you've got at least 4 times more of it you've got to eat to get 1 unit of retinol. And at worst, you've got 28 times more that you have to eat in order to make retinol. Now, these appear in various foods. Carotenes are basically color pigments. So anything that's colorful, any vegetable that's colorful, because the carotenes are only in plants. Colorful vegetables and fruits will have carotenes in them. Egg yolks, liver especially, vitamin A concentrates in the liver. So liver is going to be your best source. I mean, in terms of weight, how much you'll actually get is in liver. You'll get some in egg yolks and you'll get a little bit of retinol in meat and stuff, but not really a significant amount. And Tony, you said that 50% of people worldwide are deficient in this vitamin. I
That's
would
correct.
believe, yeah, I believe it'd be somewhere around there because not only are people not eating vegetables in general, like the average person, they're not eating vegetables in general. There's no way they're eating enough to get a significant amount of retinol because we don't use beta carotene directly for the most part. It needs to be converted into retinol. So you need to be eating a lot of vegetables and fruits to get any significant amount of retinol. And it's pretty easy to be deficient. And in this Western world here, we eat meat, right, which is muscle. We don't eat the organs. A lot of people have gotten onto the trend of eating liver, and I think that's fantastic, but not enough, really, not enough. And even the carnivore pages are restricting that amount to like once a week, 2 ounces of liver a day. I'm looking at a carnivore website
Hmm.
here. They're recommending a maximum of 2 ounces of liver per day or 400 grams per week. This is not very much. I recommend one to
Hmm.
three times
Hmm.
a week, pretty much for anyone. So easy to be deficient in this. And vitamin A, it is an antioxidant. The most, the easiest way to remember the antioxidant vitamins is ACE, ACNE. So this is very well known. No one's disputing that vitamin A is essential, right? They're just really warning you about the dose, which, as you said, is quite weird. And we will go into that. But yeah, it's involved in your immune system, your vision. The reason it's called retinol is because it's named after the retina. It concentrates in the retina. So it's very important for vision. They were using liver back in like ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon for night blindness, to cure night blindness. They were using this before they even knew what vitamins were, way before we knew what vitamins were. They were using it as a medical treatment for night blindness and other vision problems. And we'll talk about a couple more of those cases later on. It's very involved in reproduction, cellular communication. I mean, this is ridiculously important. It has tons of different roles in the body. But yeah, especially with your immune system, your vision, your reproduction, and your cellular communication. And in fact, it can cause birth defects if you are deficient in it, which ironically, that's one of the things that the mainstream world warns against. We're gonna dive in, don't worry, but they're saying that if you take too much vitamin A, it could cause birth defects. Well, okay, we know for a definite fact that vitamin A deficiency causes birth defects, especially in the malformation of their eyes and other organs, and lack of growth when they are born, and definitely having infertile animals if you are deficient. Vitamin A deficiency can cause deafness, and none of this is new. Again, this is about 100 years old, 90 years old. A lot of this information, this is not new.
Yeah, to jump on what you were just saying, before we had vitamin A and vitamin C and vitamin B, sailors used to say, make sure he's getting lemons or he's going to die. The Egyptians used to say, oh, if you're going blind, get some liver. We had vitamins, we just didn't isolate them. We didn't know specifically what vitamins we were. We just knew that pregnant women needed more of this, fighting age males needed more of this. They used to partition the animal even in such a way that certain groups of people got certain organs or different diets, and they would supplement people with these things. So supplementing is definitely not anything new. We just didn't know how much of which vitamin, how much of which mineral was in these things, but we definitely knew that if this was wrong with you, you need some of this. If you're short in this and you're having this problem, take some of this. We've been doing that for thousands of years, like you said, all the way since Babylon.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so vitamin A is super, super important. And just like you, I tried to go in and find what is the evidence that it is toxic. And it's surprisingly scant. You've got all these people and all these organizations, these medical organizations saying that vitamin A is toxic. And if you type it in, I'm looking for vitamin A toxicity or proof that
Mhm.
vitamin A is toxic, there's thousands of articles. And yet none of them, maybe there is a controlled study out there, but I couldn't find anything controlled in animals. I'm looking for animals. I'm not expecting them to overdose children on purpose or something like that. But I was expecting to find like, yeah, we had 200 rats. We gave them 100,000 IU, equivalent to our body weight here, IU equivalent. And yeah, they got liver toxicity. They got fatty liver or something. There's just nothing. I couldn't find anything
No.
like that. So we're gonna have to be going in here and looking at the nitty-gritty details of these pages here from the NIH and other agencies
Mhm.
because it's tricky to go through this and find anything that's even remotely satisfying to me.
Mhm.
And we should say here that the retinols, they're often grouped in with a bunch of drugs that are
Mhm.
like vitamin A. Like for
Mhm.
example, here there's one called bexarotene, and it's used to treat a certain T cell lymphoma cancer. So it's a cancer drug, and yet it is only similar to vitamin A. It has vitamin A-like activities, is what I'm told here by the NIH,
Mhm.
and that's not vitamin A.
No.
They're not even saying that it's chemically similar or bioidentical, word you hear often. They're not saying it's bioidentical. It has vitamin A-like activities, and
Mhm.
yet they're literally using this drug in the same sentence as vitamin A. They're saying vitamin A, retinols could cause this, and yet they're talking about bexarotene or they're talking about Accutane.
Yep.
Or, there's a list of these drugs.
Yep. That's like blaming the potatoes in the vodka that killed somebody from alcoholism. You're taking the most scarce aspect of something and you're attributing it to that. Going hand in hand with what you said about the lack of research in vitamin A being toxic, I actually did a specific deep dive to just see how often is someone even diagnosed with vitamin A toxicity. And as it turns out, on a yearly basis throughout the world, or where it's recorded, so we can assume that there's some ups and some downs to those numbers, fairly, but throughout the world, 10 cases of vitamin A toxicity are reported every year. And some years it's not even documented, but on average, it's 10 reports per year. And in these 10 cases of vitamin A toxicity across the world every year, the common treatment is making them stop the source of vitamin A. So, your harm of vitamin A toxicity is if you take too much, the treatment is not shocking your system, it's not pumping you full of charcoal, it's not emptying your stomach. The treatment is stop taking so much vitamin A. Give it a break. You've been taking too much vitamin A for too long. And yes, just as you said, medical induced drugs are to blame here in most cases. Because just like they do with statin drugs, they say, hey, we're going to give you some calcium, but it's really not calcium. They're saying it's calcium and it has calcium in it, but that's what these vitamin A's are. They're not vitamin A, you're getting drugs. And even then, I would guarantee that those drugs have the synthetic retinol forms of vitamin A in them. So you're looking at the potential of being one of 10 people in a year who are suffering symptoms so severe that they just have to slow down on their intake a little bit. That's the harm here. That's if it does happen. If you are one of the 10 people in the world, you better be careful because you'll have to slow down a little bit until you get better.
Exactly. I found the same thing. Yep. They say even in the cases of acute toxicity, the treatment is just stop taking it. And they
Hmm.
say that all of the symptoms are reversible. They just disappear once you stop taking the vitamin A,
Hmm.
unless, this is their caveat, unless an organ was damaged, like the liver. But try to find that evidence that vitamin A is going to damage the liver, you're on a rabbit hole here, which should be
Hmm.
clear. It should be on the front page here. If these medical associations and medical websites, if they're so against vitamin A, that should be the top of the page. Hey, this study showed that we gave
Hmm.
too much vitamin A to pigs, and this is what happened. Again, I don't expect it with humans, but they can't. It's not there. You check the references too. It's not there. A controlled experiment showing liver damage or organ damage from too much vitamin A. And yeah, I
Hmm.
also found that a lot of those cases you mentioned, yes, they're from the drugs, they're not from the vitamin. Number one. Number two, a lot of them were from children accidentally ingesting the drug or the
Hmm.
cream, because retinols, fake retinols, and real retinols are often used in skin creams because vitamin A is
Hmm.
so important for the skin. So yeah, a lot of these cases are children accidentally ingesting too much, where it would be too much for an adult too, but keep out of the reach of children kind of thing. And
Hmm.
they show up as a lot of these cases.
So it's not having cabinet locks that are really causing these overdoses. It's not so much the vitamin A itself.
Yeah, and I'm sure you would agree that if you're using these vitamin A based drugs or vitamin A like drugs for a skin problem, you're doing it backwards anyways, right? Skin
Hmm.
problems are caused by processed foods in general, especially
Hmm.
gluten, sometimes dairy, and various nutrient deficiencies, including
Hmm.
vitamin A.
Yep.
The answer is not to go and take fake vitamin A
Yep.
drugs from a doctor. The answer is to fix your
Hmm.
diet and get on a proper supplement program and eat eggs and eat liver.
Yeah. So if you're watching this, you're learning something today that pharmaceuticals can cause damage. This is groundbreaking information that's never been spoken before. Pharmaceutical drugs have been linked to potential problems.
Absolutely. Remember, they can't patent vitamin A. So even though pharmaceutical companies do make supplements, they're actually huge players in the supplement game because they have the facilities to make supplements. The same facilities you need to make drugs is the same ones that you need to make supplements. You need big stainless steel vats and you pill pressers, right? Encapsulation machines and bottling machines. They have all this stuff. So they're huge players in the supplement industry, but they can't make that much money off of it. Vitamin A is not very expensive. No vitamin is very expensive. So even if you go in and buy them all separately, it doesn't compare to what they can make off of Accutane or any of these,
Hmm.
vitamin A like cancer drugs or anything like that. Totally different story.
No, absolutely. You find these instances where they're always taking something and making it out to be something else, and then trying to attribute it back to that same thing that was actually the help in the first place, like the case with the vitamin A pharmaceuticals, the case with the statins, the case with the Harvard study where they tried to disprove that the body could absorb collagen and cartilage and rebuild its own cartilage. And they basically sued Dr. Wallach, and he had to prove that with the right amount of minerals, the right amount of cartilage, you can in fact regrow cartilage. And then as soon as Harvard study had to accept that he was right, they turned around and they made a pharmaceutical drug that was essentially just cartilage. They added a couple of chemicals to it, they patented it, and now it's a treatment. So they always find a way to make it specific to their patent so they can be the only ones that have it. So if they're forced arms behind their back and they're just forced to acknowledge that a vitamin or a mineral is beneficial in some way, which they do everything they can to avoid these types of things, they will find a way to make it patented to them so that only they can sell it. And then when a problem comes 20 years down the line, they're not going to say Bayer, Monsanto, they're not going to say Bayer's drugs had a problem. They're going to say vitamin A has a problem. Too much calcium can cause a problem. Too much cartilage can cause a problem. To this day, they're still sticking to their guns and saying that things like glucosamine and chondroitin and MSM have shown zero impact towards improving people's joint health. Except we have hundreds of thousands of people across the world that are taking these products and whose joints are improving. You can't always trust the science, as we've come to find in the last 4 or 5 years.
And livestock, where this is routinely put into their feeds because we know it works.
That's that's the thing that that's the thing that really drives the point home once you begin to accept this is the fact that in pigs, in cows, we'll admit if you're not getting enough calcium, the cow's bones are going to break. If it's not getting enough selenium, the cow will get cerebral palsy. The cow will get Bell's palsy. You're going to get cancer. A cow's going to get cancer if it doesn't get enough selenium. A cow's going to get brain cancer if it doesn't get enough gallium. And then you say, hey, could this be a possibility with humans? And then they say, don't be ridiculous. You need to talk to a neurosurgeon.
Absolutely. My neighbor's dog, she's got this little dog, and it's not doing too well. She takes it to the vet. The vet recommends extra glucosamine, of course. Right? It's not controversial in animals. So I was
Mm-hmm.
able to dig up one pretty interesting case here. It's from the book The Vitamin A Story, Lifting the Shadow of Death by R.D. Samba. And this is from 1986 here, but these things, these rumors, they hang around the medical world a long time. There's plenty of doctors who still say that vitamin D is toxic. Meanwhile, the original form, the original synthetic form was toxic, but that was like in the 1920s and 30s. Like this has been solved. We fixed that. And yet they'll still say here 100 years later that vitamin D could be toxic. Yeah, it could be toxic if you go back 100 years and take the form that nobody ever uses now because it was proven to be toxic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, something from 1986, just don't think that's old when it comes to medical dogma. They don't let go of things.
Mm-hmm.
So August 21st, 1986, the residents of Baikal awakened to unwelcome news. A popular radio announcer told his listeners that more than 2 dozen children in Albay had fallen ill with nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea after being given a vitamin A capsule. The source of the news about widespread adverse reactions to vitamin A was Francis Burgo, a young physician. He was involved in a medical action group here, and they jumped all over this. I think this is in the Philippines. And after this broadcast, Burgos and his associates had brought nearly 20 children with, in quotes here, toxic effects of vitamin A to the regional health office, where a local pediatrician examined the children and found them all to be malnourished and showing signs of fever, chronic diarrhea, and upper respiratory infection, all symptoms unrelated to vitamin A toxicity. In fact, questions put to the parents revealed that most of the children already had these problems before being given vitamin A capsules. So this whole thing was just a hoax. It was just, let's get some attention for the radio today because these children were already sick and the symptoms they had nothing to do with vitamin A toxicity. And that medical evaluation was largely ignored, and radio stations continued for several days to denigrate the project here. This project was to give vitamin A capsules to malnourished children. But nope, they got toxicity that has nothing to do with toxicity, and they were already sick before this.
Man, that's really interesting. I'd like to look into who sponsored these case studies.
And by the way, in that same study, I do believe here, they were tracking side effects from vitamin A supplementation, which is 200,000 IUs. And PS here, the current American RDA for men, adult men, is 900 micrograms, and for women is 700 micrograms. I'm pretty sure they do this IU thing just to make it hard to convert numbers and just to make
Mm-hmm.
it hard to understand things because prior to the IU system, everything was measured in micrograms or milligrams. It was on the metric system, which is very easy to understand and compare doses to things. But yeah, the RDA, they give it to you in micrograms, and yet everything else is basically in IUs. So you have to times that by 3.33. So we get here for the adult man, the current American RDA is just under 3,000 IUs. So to see some symptoms here in children, they were given 200,000 IUs, and we don't know which form it was, but either way, that's a very high dose. The symptoms were still mild at those doses. Transient headache and vomiting and diarrhea occur within 24 hours of administration of that huge dose. And despite those mild effects, this medical action group in Baikal had misrepresented a host of illnesses as side effects of vitamin A. These included respiratory disease, conjunctivitis or pink eye infection, skin rashes, and intestinal worms. I don't know how vitamin A is going to be responsible for intestinal worms, but they're blaming it here. Many of which occurred many days after administration of vitamin A, or in other cases, were already present before the children received any vitamin A. The two children who died from alleged vitamin A toxicity were found, after the pediatrician's further investigation, to have been ill before being given any vitamin A. So if you ever hear people have died from this, well, even if they did die from this experiment, it was 200,000 IU, which is way more than any of us are recommending. And this is a child, so they don't need that high of dose. They do need a dose, but not that high. My goodness. And here, even in the same blurb here, they're saying the benefits of vitamin A supplementation in reducing the risk of dying are considered greatly to outweigh the low risks of mild side effects. The mild side effects of vitamin A supplementation can be compared with the side effects of other measures taken to improve the health and survival of children. And they're saying, such as vaccines, right? We give the DPT vaccine or the oral polio virus vaccines. I'm not agreeing with that. You're probably not agreeing with that, but they're saying,
Mhm.
hey, we give them vaccines with a risk ratio already. This is standard practice in the medical world. We know that there's a risk to giving vaccines. They can absolutely be toxic. They can cause seizures. They can cause paralysis. They can cause all kinds of motor neuron diseases, and they can kill the child or the
Mhm.
adult. And yet we accept that risk profile in the name of preventing a disease. So they're arguing here that vitamin A supplementation, the benefits greatly outweigh the risks. And I agree.
Yes, absolutely. I was just reading about another study that occurred with children specifically, since we're on the subject of children. And as you know, chronic and severe vitamin A deficiency will generally in children lead to blindness. The majority of childhood blindness is based on vitamin A deficiency. Well, as it turns out, in cases where the vitamin A deficiency is severe enough, in general, after a child becomes completely blind as a result of the vitamin A deficiency, the majority of them actually die within a month,
I didn't know that.
which goes to show how severe this not toxicity, the deficiency can actually be. Now, this study wasn't overall, it was in a specific area, a specific region. I want to say it was in Latin America where the kids were going blind due to vitamin A deficiency. And the majority of these children, simple Google search would be able to pull it up for anybody interested. But these kids were actually dying on average more so than not within a month of becoming blind. So the signs of a vitamin A deficiency will show themselves and you will know. And the average person is deficient in vitamin A. Anything dryness of the skin, dryness of the eyes, generally any eye problem, these deficiencies are more common, which means even half of the people listening to this, it's very likely that you're vitamin A deficient. Given the fact that there's 10 people perhaps a year that are getting a vitamin A toxicity, and these people are all involved in some type of drug usage, of a synthetic form of vitamin A, there really is no risk. And to be quite honest, you would go bankrupt trying to overdose on vitamin A if it was a good form of vitamin A, especially our products. You would bankrupt yourself before you were able to overdose on vitamin A. In the case, what you were saying earlier, the amounts that people are taking, I actually tallied up all the vitamin A I take throughout the day between all the different products that I take. And I take 20,000 IUs a day of vitamin A. I take 3,250 micrograms on a daily basis and have for 2+ years now. And I've never seen any symptoms. I've never seen any issues. And there's people that take a lot more than that. There's people that take what I take twice a day. And there's no harm, no foul. There's no problem with it whatsoever because we take an ethical, plant derived, safe form of vitamin A. And to boot, I would probably argue if you put our supplements up against any other supplements in the world, we have the most bioavailable supplements on top of that. So when you consider a vitamin, when you buy a vitamin from Walmart, if it says it has 1,000 micrograms in it, you're not getting 1,000 micrograms. You might be getting 20 or 30. You might be getting 50. If you got 10% of what a vitamin supplement says that it has in it from a synthetic form, from a cheap, lower quality form, you'd be generous to be assuming that you'd be getting 10% of that. That's just not how it works. Our vitamins are extremely bioavailable because they're designed for bioavailability in mind. So I'm taking the most bioavailable vitamins, the most readily absorbed vitamins. I'm taking 2 times what's considered toxic. So what they're saying is toxic and will cause toxic shock, will damage your liver, or I'm double the range that they consider to be toxic. So that should show you what their numbers really mean. Because I've been here for more than 2 years doing this now, consistently taking twice the toxic dose, and I'm moving just fine. And there's plenty of us who are doing this. There's tens of thousands of us who are doing exactly this.
And you look good, Tony.
So thank you.
Audio people can't see. You got to take my word for it. But I have another friend, Yannick Constantine. I just recorded an episode with him yesterday on health gurus who die young. I'm not sure which episode here is going to post first, but I got him to put it on record because I know he's told me in private that he did this experiment on himself, trying to see if he could give himself symptoms of vitamin A toxicity. So he took between 25,000 and 50,000. Like sometimes he took 25,000, sometimes he took 50,000 every day for a year until he finally got some symptoms. Tony, could you guess what kind of symptoms you think this guy got after a year?
I would say that his skin probably got dry. His skin started peeling a little bit at the palms.
Well, he got, in his words, dry feet
Dry feet.
with
So you
25,000 to 50,000 IUs every day for a year.
so you mean to tell me if I take 5 to 10 times the toxic amount, there's a potential risk that after several months I could get dry feet?
Absolutely.
Viewers, are these the risks that you guys are willing to take? Are you willing to risk dry feet to save yourself from dying?
I'm willing to risk it personally. And yeah, I mean, you could wash your feet a few times a day and get dry feet too. It's pretty easy to get dry feet. And there's some other deficiencies that can come into play here as well. But Yannick is super healthy. He's one of the
Mm-hmm.
healthiest people I know. Fun little experiment there. And if that sounds too trivial to you who are listening, I mean, again, you can go in and try and look for something more substantial. It is quite hard to find something more substantial here. From the NIH here, they do say that high doses of vitamin A are usually achieved by vitamin A supplements, and hypervitaminosis A, or high vitamin A toxicity, can also occur with excessive dietary intake of liver, particularly that of carnivores. Important caveat there. Bears, seals, and dogs, they're saying, or saltwater fish like cod liver oil. But the link is pretty weak here. They say it's a strong link. They give it an A score, a link, and yet in this whole article, it's a big overview of vitamin A toxicity. They never give an actual study at all, not with animals, not with humans. They just said this. All they did was say this. And they are also saying here as well, if you just stop taking it, basically it goes away, whatever it is. And it's usually just dry skin, some gingivitis or muscle and joint pains, fatigue, mental dullness. And they're correlating it here too. Remember, you can't just check like serum or blood vitamin A. It's not very reliable. So what they do to determine vitamin A toxicity is look at your liver test abnormalities, like bilirubin, right? Or alkaline phosphate levels. There's regular levels that you would look at to see if there's a liver problem. If you've been taking vitamin A and they check your liver and your liver's not doing too well, they might very well blame that on vitamin A, even though there's many other deficiencies and just dehydration, which is extremely common, that could cause any of these liver markers to go up. You might actually have a liver problem, right? But that in no way proves that the vitamin A caused those liver markers to go up
Mm-hmm.
or down.
I actually have a little bit of case material here and things I'd like to get into later on in the day that actually greatly strengthen your argument right now. There's many cases here I can show of instances where a healthy liver, a pre-existing healthy liver, can pretty much rule out every single thing that they point the finger at today, like saturated fats being dangerous, high cholesterol, minerals like copper being toxic. There's so much evidence. There's so many case studies on multitudes, just hundreds of cases here, hundreds of people, hundreds of animals, showing that a healthy liver, a functioning liver, can digest these things in most cases. So it's definitely not the vitamin A causing the problems. It was a already unhealthy liver getting exposed to pharmaceutical drugs. And then, of course, a doctor is never going to say, this thing that I prescribed to you is causing problems. He's going to say, it's the vitamin A because he gets paid to say it's the vitamin A. If he says these drugs are dangerous, he doesn't get his kickbacks. These drugs have kickbacks, and they will never blame the drugs. They will continue to prescribe the drugs. It's very irresponsible of them. And some doctors are more cognizant of these facts than others. Some of them are directly complicit in this, but the fact is, modern medical academia prescribes drugs that they either know the risks of and don't care, or are unaware of the risks, in which case, I guess morally and ethically, it's better to be foolish of what your job is than it is to be directly malicious for financial gain. However, we see these things happen time and time again. They'll switch from one drug, it'll be considered dangerous. And then that same company will come up with a new drug and they'll say, you know, we made some mistakes in the past, but you can trust us this time. And the doctors will be complicit with it. And the fact that they get tens of thousands of dollars of kickbacks has nothing to do, I'm sure, with why they prescribe these specific drugs for problems. And of course, a new study comes out every single year saying vitamins and minerals can be overlooked, they're overrepresented, and you can get everything you need from food. And then you say, but doctor, in 1956, an orange had 16 times the minerals that it has today. So do I have to eat 16 times more? And he says, well, that's about enough time for me today. It was nice seeing you again.
Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about there. I agree. Okay, let's talk about this polar bear liver thing because this is one of their cruxes that they have. And it seems that all these articles that I'm looking at, this is mentioned. So in 1983, a team of Swedish scientists studying the Arctic, not Antarctic, I know you said Antarctic earlier, Arctic waters discovered that the seal and polar bear livers were collecting and concentrating. Oh, whoops. I'm not going to give away. I want to hear your theory first. But okay, in 1983, let me start this over. Sorry, I started from the top. Okay, so this goes back to a group of Arctic explorers who were eating polar bear livers. And these polar bear livers apparently contain 8 million IUs of vitamin A. And it was said that these explorers got extreme toxicity. This is like their best case for a high
Mm-hmm.
level of toxicity in the history of medicine,
Mm-hmm.
basically, was these Arctic explorers. The problem here is, even with that, nobody died. None of these explorers died. You might think they died from this. That's how bad the toxicity was, but no, they did not die. But it was claimed that the explorers suffered from hair loss and dermatitis. So 8 million IUs, they experienced severe toxicity and their symptoms consisted of hair loss and dermatitis. So you mentioned something about this before we recorded. What do you think was happening here?
Actually, I think we might be looking at two different studies here. I think I actually have a similar study, a similar case study, but the case study that I have that I've pulled up is there were three guys doing they were doing an Antarctic study. And these three guys doing the Antarctic study, two of them died, and I'll get into that shortly. These three guys, they went to, I forget the name of the point. It's like Ellis Point or something in Antarctica. They landed there and they went 300 miles into Antarctica. Now, these guys were in the coldest place in the world. And quickly in the journey, they lost one of their members in a fatal fall. So they don't specify that these deaths happened. The guy fell into a giant chasm, and all of the food went into this chasm. So they had nothing at that point. So they hunted mainly seals and polar bears, is what this case study says. They only found one person at the end, and I'll get into that in a moment.
But there's no
So
polar bears at the Antarctic.
then it has to be the Arctic at the pole then. So this had to have been at the Arctic then, something called Ellis Point. These guys, geography is not my thing. I'm more of a supplements guy. But these guys were eating polar bear, so then it has to be at the Arctic because there is no polar bears at the Antarctic. So these guys lost one of their members in a fatal fall, and all of the food went down the hole with them. And they were stranded in the coldest place in the world with absolutely no food. So after a while, they began to eat a diet strictly of polar bear. And every time they made a pot of this polar bear stew, they would take these giant purple livers and they would throw them in the stew and they would share it. So later in the journey, these guys didn't have access to the polar bears anymore. They started to eat their dogs as the dogs died. They would wait for one of the sled dogs to die and then they would eat it. Now, these guys reportedly, by the survivor accounts, were feeding the dogs, the remaining dogs, the muscle meat, and they were eating the organs. They were eating the livers, they were eating the kidneys. But mainly, these guys were just trying to focus on eating the livers. So these guys continued on their journey, and 2 weeks into the process of only eating polar bear and dog livers, they began to have their skin falling off. And finally, a few weeks in, one of the guys who had already gone into full blown psychosis, now, whether this was from vitamin A toxicity or the fact that he was stuck out in the middle of the coldest place in the entire world for several weeks under the assumption that he was going to die in starvation after seeing one of his friends die, that's potential for this psychosis. But nonetheless, the guy woke up the next morning and his friend was dead in his sleeping bag, frozen to death. So before that, they were complaining about massive headaches, skin peeling off, and that was the extent. So finally, the last guy finally makes it to civilization again. He finally finds a survival team. So here's what we can surmise from the study. If you were on the coldest place on Earth, and I'll relate how much cold and more specifically extreme cold can affect how the body processes minerals and vitamins in a moment. But if you're in the coldest place in the world and your absorption and digestion are affected by this cold, and then you go through severe malnutrition and starvation, and then you eat a diet of nothing but the most vitamin A rich foods in the entire world, nothing but that, it will make you sick until you stop. Because as soon as the guy had access to food, his skin stopped peeling and he went back to normal. Now, this is the one case where you can prove that vitamin A had some type of ill effect. But there's something that has to be said about polar livers specifically, as well as seals from this region. These animals live in the extreme cold, and vitamin A is what their body uses to produce the cold-resistant blubber layers. So these animals have become super producers and storers of vitamin A. So they're the most efficient creatures on Earth at storing vitamin A. So when you eat a diet consisting of only the part of the body that stores the most vitamin A and the most efficient vitamin A storage vessel in the entire world under starvation and frozen conditions, there is a risk that you may get sick if you continue with this for several weeks. In which case, as soon as you stop, you go back to normal, as reported by the one survivor. So 2 people died, neither of which, in the case that I've pulled up, shows any relation to vitamin A toxicity. And this is the case. This is what we can surmise, that this is the one instance where we can say vitamin A was related to some type of instances. And this was under extreme cold, eating polar bear liver, which has been designed to store as much vitamin A as possible. So under starvation and a diet of only that, there's a case that you may get a little sick and it'll stop once you stop. So this is the strongest argument for any type of vitamin A toxicity there really is, because go ahead and Google vitamin A deaths. I dare you. You will not find a single one. And even this is the closest to a vitamin A death we have ever seen, and neither of which case can be related to vitamin A, even indirectly.
Yeah, you're saying there was 3 guys total, and one of them fell off a chasm, and the other one
One,
froze to death in his sleep.
yeah. And if I may, just for another moment, I have a story here that relates to how extreme cold can actually affect the human body in other ways as well, that
Yeah.
may or not have an impact on whether or not we can say that the cold might have had an impact on why these guys were having that trouble with vitamin A in the first place. So, as the story with the cold goes, there was a case study of something like 50 plus sheep dying overnight. And it was a weird instance because it didn't seem to be that cold of a night, but it was something in like Missouri or Minnesota. I can pull up the details in a moment, but it seems to be a regularly cold night, but apparently a cold draft had come in for 10 to 20 minutes. A freezing cold wind had come in for just a bit. So everybody who was asleep during the night woke up and they said, how did all these sheep die? It's not even that cold. It seems like hypothermia, but it wasn't cold enough. So as it turns out, they went and checked the meters, the temperatures and stuff, and it turned out that for just a moment in the middle of the night, the temperatures had dropped to something like -20 and all these sheep died. Now, this was abnormal because sheep, especially these sheep, were designed to live through these types of cold conditions. So a veterinary pathologist was assigned to the case, and he determined that the sheep had extremely high levels of nitrates in their blood. And as a result of eating oxidized grains and not being properly supplemented, these sheep were exposed to levels of cold that nearby farms were also experiencing. But the reason that these sheep died was because of their diet. And the reason was because their thyroid was not functioning properly because of the diet. And these particular sheep died at this farm and all of the nearby sheep didn't die. And this was specifically related to the fact that their thyroids weren't able to withstand that amount of cold. And these sheep would have appeared completely normal. Now, mind you, they had mineral imbalances and they had bad diet problems, but they seemed completely normal until the stress of the extreme cold came, in which case they were unable to handle the nitrates. Now, this isn't vitamin A, but it can and will show you how something can seem normal until extreme cold measures are met, in which case death can even be the result. Now, Dr. Wallach was actually the pathologist that got sent out to this case, but he was the one that related how the cold can test out your organs in such a way that may not be readily visible.
Yeah, he said that was the first mass die-off from
Hmm.
pollution and well, first one documented from nitrate poisoning, and that's kind of what kickstarted his career there. That's what got him future grants to work with the NIH and the giant project that ended in his doing over 17,500 autopsies on 454 species of animals. That whole thing, that whole part of his life was started because of this. That's why he got the invite. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, he said he cut them open and their blood was like chocolate blood.
Hmm.
And yeah, their thyroids were huge.
Yeah, anybody hoping to read more of this, there's a book called Rare Earths Forbidden Cures. It's an incredible book. It'll teach you things you won't really learn anywhere else. We can only cover so much in the Q&As that we do in these podcasts.
Absolutely. So you think that the stress of the cold was one of the major things, and obviously, of course, they're eating the most concentrated thing, and that's the
Hmm.
only thing that they were eating,
Nothing
and
but, yes,
they probably had other deficiencies as well.
yes. That study wouldn't stand in even the most biased academic situations.
Well,
No,
it's not
no,
a study at all; it's a case.
yeah, it's a case. It's that case wouldn't stand up under any scrutiny whatsoever and under the scientific method. No researchers would allow all of those variables, all of those unspecific situations to make any type of assertion. But in the case of vitamin A, we're allowing it to purvey the common understanding of all peoples. We're allowing this happenstance, unstudied, polluted, convoluted one instance in which no deaths specifically related to it were involved. We're just mentioning the study. And that's a good note for people to take on. When you hear about these studies, sometimes all you have to do is look into these studies and you'll see that these studies are not really studies at all. These instances are not really instances at all because all I had to do was read this story and immediately I saw that there were some holes in the narrative here.
Yeah, this is a survival story. It's not a vitamin A story per se. So I'm gonna read here from the book The Calcium Factor by Robert Barefoot. I do like this book. I give it a good review. And it says here in 1983, a team of Swedish scientists studying the Arctic waters discovered that the seal and polar bear livers were collecting and concentrating cadmium found in the water. So that dermatitis and hair loss that these explorers had previously been recorded as having was probably caused by cadmium poisoning, is
Mm-hmm.
what Barefoot says here, because seals, well, even more so, polar bears, these are at the top of the food chain. Polar bears are at the top. Seals are near the top. All the elements are in seawater, right? So mercury, cadmium, arsenic, lead, all that stuff. It concentrates roughly 10 times each time it goes up the food chain. It's called bioaccumulation or biomagnification. So if there's 1 unit in seawater, there's about 10 units in the plankton or the seaweed. And then there's about 100 units in the fish that eats that seaweed, and so on. It concentrates all the way up the food chain. So when you've got seals who eat medium-sized fish, and those fish ate little fish, and those little fish ate plankton, they're concentrated several steps up here. And then the polar bear eats the seal, so it has even more concentration of whatever's bad there. This is why people say, oh, be careful about eating tuna and shark and swordfish and stuff because they're high up the food chain, so they concentrate mercury as well as cadmium and all this stuff. And I mean, I would kind of argue about that type of cadmium and that type of mercury not being as
Mm-hmm.
big of a problem as industrial forms, but whatever, put
Yeah,
that aside.
absolutely.
Either way, the polar bear liver definitely has more cadmium, more mercury, more all this stuff. It's not a balanced diet, and you're probably not going to die from eating it once, but if you start subsisting on polar bear liver, you are probably going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no one ever mentions that cadmium thing. It's got to be vitamin A.
Yeah. Anyone who knows better or who's worked in trade specifically knows that cadmium is like it's the metal to fear. You know, for welders and people that are grinding and burning metals and stuff, like cadmium is probably the nastiest thing that people get exposed to in the trades. So whenever you hear cadmium, if someone's exposed to cadmium, aluminum, and vitamin A, and then they get sick, I'm going to say the cadmium was the cause. I don't even know about the cadmium connection. Cadmium's a particularly nasty metal.
Yep, polar bears will have a lot of all the bad stuff that comes from the seawater.
Hmm.
So I did find a few more case reports here from the NIH. One of them is an 18-year-old woman who had been taking vitamin A for an unspecified skin disorder. Already a little bit sloppy here when it's unspecified.
Yes.
Okay, this is like a paragraph here. This is not very much. Okay, and the dose was 100,000 to 200,000 IU daily for approximately 16 months, which is way more than you need. Way more than I'll tell you, way more than Tony will tell you, way more than Dr. Wallach will tell you, especially if we're talking about retinol here. She developed muscular stiffness and fatigue, and it got worse with exercise. And she subsequently noted bone pain, headache, poor appetite, nosebleeds, dry skin. She denied jaundice. She had no history of liver disease, alcohol abuse, or risk factors for viral hepatitis. The physical examination showed dry, scaly skin, enlargement of the liver and spleen. She had normal bilirubin, but her AST or aspartate aminotransferase was elevated, and her alkaline phosphatase was elevated. Her serum vitamin A levels were elevated, and her vitamin A, once she stopped it, and once she stopped the vitamin A, her symptoms improved markedly within the next 2 months.
Hmm.
And she continued to have mildly elevated serum enzymes, liver enzymes, and a prolonged prothrombin time, which I think is blood clotting time.
It almost seems like when you put vitamin A through an extreme excess, it almost does what a deficiency can do. When you're getting the cell transfer rate and you're getting, the clotting, and it almost seems like if you take way too much of it, it kind of convolutes the processes that vitamin A is known to prevent.
Well, here is a big problem with this case study. The key points they note here is that the medication, which they just list as vitamin A,
Hmm.
100,000 to 200,000 IU daily, this is supposed to be a medical case report from the
Hmm.
NIH, and they
Hmm.
just listed vitamin A. What do you mean, vitamin A?
Hmm.
This blew me away.
Hmm.
So there's an unspecified skin disorder here. So we know she already had a skin problem, therefore she probably
Hmm.
has several deficiencies. She
Hmm.
probably eats processed foods.
Absolutely. Her digestion is definitely compromised already.
Yeah, there's no date here anyways. Like we don't even know when this happened, where this happened, and an unspecified skin disorder. Okay, so she takes one vitamin in excessive doses and we have no idea what the form is. Are we serious? This is an NIH case report here
Yeah.
and you're just going to list vitamin A when you know darn well there's multiple different forms of vitamin A, and this looks like it was prescribed by a medical doctor here because this looked like this comes from a medical chart. So you're telling me we don't get the form of vitamin A here from the NIH. We don't get whether this was a drug or whether this was a supplement, brand name. What we get nothing except for vitamin A. Come on, this should be thrown out as evidence automatically because you're not even telling us what form to look at.
Absolutely. And no other research into other potential causes is mentioned either. Nothing is being ruled out here. We're just assuming it's vitamin A.
Yeah, this seems to be the only factor that they're looking at completely. Yeah.
Well, that's some pretty damning evidence to our argument, I'd say.
There's another one here. 63-year-old man who had been taking 400,000 IU of vitamin A daily for 8 years, and he developed dry and fissured skin, followed by general fatigue and abdominal swelling. Really, really bad symptoms here.
A
I don't mean to dismiss it, but wow.
little bit of gas.
Yeah, this is not very impressive to me. Okay, but he had no history of liver disease, jaundice, or alcohol abuse. He'd been treated for tuberculosis 3 years previously. Okay, well, his immune system wasn't 100%. He took no other medications. The vitamin A was taken under the belief that it would help prevent upper respiratory tract infections, which, yeah, it's involved in the respiratory tract, but
Mhm.
Upon examination, he was not jaundiced, but he did have some spider nevi. What is that? Varicose veins. They love the Latin here. It's a vascular lesion characterized by anomalous dilation of end vasculature. Okay.
Almost sounds like some form of a thrombosis.
Yeah, kind of sounds like they don't want you to understand what's going on
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. He had a buildup of fluid in the abdomen, an enlarged liver and spleen. Laboratory tests showed he had minimal elevations in liver tests, so his bilirubin was kind of fine, a little bit high. They did find his enlarged liver, and he had some fibrosis there without frank cirrhosis, so without serious scarring, lesions on the
Mhm.
liver. That's good.
Which means his liver will recover
Yeah.
100%.
And remember, this is 8 years at an even higher dose, 400,000 IUs. This is a crazy high dose, honestly.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
spending money on that dose.
You'll have to sell your car in order to have the money to pay for that much.
Yeah, it's a lot. And at the end of the case here, the patient was no longer taking high dose vitamin A, but was on a daily multivitamin with 10,000 IUs in it. I don't know where he's getting that multivitamin. That's a big dose for a multivitamin. And followed a diet that was high in vitamin A. So he had liver and carrot juice. Even though carrot juice is beta carotene and liver is retinol, but okay, they're
Mhm.
just putting them both in the same group here, whatever.
Mhm.
And they
Very
calculate
irresponsible.
that to be 50,000 IU daily, again, between the two different forms. Okay, whatever.
Mhm.
But the problem here, once again, in the key points listed, this is an official NIH document here, going through case histories. It's supposedly in detail. Once again, the medication listed is only in the dose. They do not tell us what form of vitamin A it is. Was this a drug? Was this a supplement? What the heck?
It's shaky as a whole, and it seems like in every one of these cases, there's some type of pre-existing condition as well. And anytime, as we know, anytime there's a pre-existing condition, we don't like pre-existing conditions. We like to get someone operating optimally. Anytime there's a pre-existing condition, we already know there's several mineral deficiencies, there's several vitamin deficiencies, there's organs that aren't functioning properly, there's digestion that's not taking place. There's a whole bunch of things going on. Anytime someone has, our bodies are designed regardless of what the people around you would lead you to believe, given this poor state of health in the world right now. Our bodies are actually designed to perform optimally. You're not supposed to have eye problems. You're not supposed to have bad bones. You're not supposed to have a bad back. You're not supposed to have liver problems. You're not supposed to have kidney disease. Diabetes doesn't run in your family. Jaundice doesn't run in your family. You don't have kidney disease because your dad had kidney disease. You have kidney disease like your dad because you guys both ate Fruit Loops every morning. That's the state of things. We're supposed to be healthy. So whenever we hear pre-existing conditions, we know to rule out any idea of something that someone's taking being the cause of it. It's what you're not taking that's the cause of it, and it's what you're eating that's the cause of it. There's pretty much nothing within reason natural that your body can't process efficiently if you just give it everything that it needs to have. Saturated fat was demonized for 70, 80 years, and we're barely starting to come around and see that that wasn't the case, that it's not fats that are the problems. We essentially just shifted the blame from sugars to fats. And now we're starting to see again that it's sugars. But fats for a while there were just, you couldn't get someone to eat fat. You know, chicken skin, they wouldn't eat fat anything. Everything was fat free. And in reality, while all this was taking place, France is the number one fat eating country in the world. They put butter on everything. They put cream in everything. All they eat is fat rich foods, and they have the third highest life expectancy in the entire world. And like their fat compared to anybody else, it's a high diagram. They eat more fat than anybody by a long shot, much more than America, and yet they're healthier than us. And they call it the French paradox. And they did a similar study with mice. And they gave mice essentially the French diet. They just plugged them full of butter and fat and meat. And these mice started getting liver failure and they started getting liver cancer. And then you know what they did with these mice? They started supplementing them with calcium and magnesium. And immediately, just after supplementing the mice with calcium and magnesium and giving them what they need, they went back to being completely normal. These same mice with the same diet, mind you, were doing just fine. The same way that French people, who's to say what they're getting? It might be the antioxidants in the wine. It might be all the cream. They might be getting enough calcium. They may be getting better sources of magnesium. We know for sure the food in France is better than the food in the United States as far as nutrition is concerned. But with all that being said, that's a case study, that's a clear study of how this diet can kill you. And with simply introducing specific minerals, now it's not always going to be the case that calcium and magnesium cause this, but it's a simple case study on how one thing that can kill you can simply be a clear lack in specific minerals because these mice were dying. There's no debate about it. They were dying. They were having liver failure, they were having liver cancer. You introduce calcium and magnesium into their diet, they're no longer dying. They're doing completely fine. And we see the same things with people like the Japanese who eat, as you had mentioned before, mercury, tons of it, iodine. I mean, they have more heavy metals in their diet than anybody else in the world, and they do completely fine. Why is that? You could speculate it's perhaps the selenium, because countless studies now are starting to point out to how if you have mercury built up in your body, selenium can chelate the mercury out. It's the same case with aluminum and lead. Most people aren't aware of this, but the most abundant mineral in the Earth's crust is aluminum. It's all over our soils, but and we all know aluminum's bad, but what is this aluminum? It's a natural plant derived aluminum that our body is completely capable of absorbing. The reason you're scared of aluminum is because deodorant, aluminum pots, whatever it is, you just think aluminum. But just like with vitamin A, just like with aluminum, there's synthetic forms, there's natural forms, there's different forms, and your body knows how to process these things as long as you're getting what you need and as long as your liver is processing these things. Calcium, it removes lead, it removes aluminum from the body. Selenium removes mercury, it removes cadmium. And that's why that's why pregnant women eat sushi in Japan. And that's why you can't, because they're getting something that's allowing them to do that. The French are getting something that's allowing them to do that. Their livers are capable of processing things that other people's livers may not be able to process. So I would always have to argue that any case where someone's getting some type of side effect from vitamin A, they have a problem with something else that would normally allow their body to process it. And it's the same thing with cholesterol. A healthy liver, we have people, they have a diet. Their liver's not functioning properly. They have high LDLs. You know, they're not processing cholesterol. You start giving them calcium, you start giving them magnesium, you start giving them B3, you start giving them omegas. Now, we don't give them these things specifically. We give them everything because I can't look at someone and say, oh, you need these four things. You need everything. And if you need anything, you need everything. And we all need it because just as we saw, 50% of people are deficient in vitamin A. Well, there's 89 other things that we know of that you have to take. So if you're deficient in one vitamin, I guarantee you're deficient in other ones. And to hope that doctors are right when they say that eating food is going to be enough. Well, if eating food is going to be enough, why are we all dying? Why are we all sick? Our livers need everything. All of our organs need all 90 essential nutrients. And it's crazy how we can give someone a handful of nutrients and then all of a sudden, boom, their liver works. Their cholesterols are back to normal. It's crazy how we get people that have artery blockage, which according to doctors can't be fixed without surgery. Start giving them vitamin A, vitamin E, start giving them a handful of minerals, and it goes back to a toddler's levels. There's no blockage at all. You get off the bad foods. That's the first step. You get on the 90 essential nutrients. You get on the things that you need. We're not going to give you two things. We're not going to give you three things. We're going to give you everything that you need. And then you don't have to worry about things like vitamin A. Again, I have to reiterate, I take twice the amount of the toxic dose. The guy he talked to yesterday put me to shame. He took 20 times the toxic dose. And after what, years, he got a little bit of dry skin on the feet. These are the arguments that we're up against here. You know, a scantily mentioned case study that you couldn't pull out that implied that vitamin A might be a problem. This is the surmounting evidence against us that you can imply there was once a study that may have concluded that a guy got some dry skin from vitamin A, and you have people echoing this in the sphere right now that vitamin A is terrible. By the way, just as vitamin A became terrible, all of a sudden sugar's great again. I don't get that one, but sugar's great, vitamin A is bad, carnivores in, vegans out. You know, what's with the trends? We're always going to need nutrition, and we're always going to need to stop eating crap. You guys
Yeah.
don't get
Eat
so
Lucky
wrapped up. This is
Charms.
bad today.
According to the government, eat Lucky Charms, you know?
It's healthier than steak.
Yeah, that's what they say. To back up what you're saying here, we can look at India. This is again from the book, The Vitamin A Story. And India is a good example because they do very, very badly on health. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, they're vegan or they're vegetarian, they must be doing
Mhm.
really well. Oh, Ayurvedic medicine comes from India. Well, India does terribly, terribly on
Mhm.
longevity. I believe they're down in the hundreds in terms of
Yeah,
overall life expectancy.
I know colon cancer is sky high with them.
Let me actually find out what number they are at.
And it's true. They're, for one reason or another, like India is just kind of associated with being really healthy. You know, we think vegetarian. We're still kind of living through the remnants of the whole vegan fad, where we assume vegetarianism must be really healthy, and it's not always the case.
Yeah, there is no reason to look at India for health guidance. India is
Mhm.
currently number 126 in the world for longevity, just under Iraq. So Iraq is doing better. Jamaica's doing better. Georgia's doing better. Syria's doing better. Bhutan's doing better. I mean, there's over 100 other countries that are doing better. And we have tons of Indian listeners, by the way. I'm pretty sure we have more Indian listeners than Canadian listeners. So yeah, they know that there's a problem there. And yeah, so here from the India National Health or National Family Health Survey, not sure what year this was. Mothers were asked whether their children had consumed any vitamin A rich foods here, and they're conflating both retinol and beta carotene, but
Mhm.
foods such as liver, fish, egg, dark green leafy vegetables, pumpkin carrots, yellow or orange sweet potatoes, ripe mango, papaya, cantaloupe, and jackfruit within the last 24 hours. And the 24-hour dietary recall is accepted as a valid dietary assessment because it's notoriously um, inaccurate to ask people what they ate, especially weeks ago, months ago, years ago. So 24 hours is kind of the limit on what you can expect a reasonably accurate answer there. So they asked, hey, have your kids had any of these vitamin A rich foods in the last 24 hours? And according to the surveys, more than 40% of children ages 12 months to 35 months, these are growing babies, toddlers, did
Of
not
course.
receive any vitamin A rich foods during the day preceding the interview. Less than 8% of the children had received an egg. One, one egg, less than 8%. The national survey demonstrates that young children have a low consumption of vitamin A rich fruit and vegetables and explains why vitamin A deficiency remains a deeply rooted public health problem in India. Still is to this day. And they go on to talk about here how even if you gave them a bunch of fruits and vegetables, it's poorly converted. It's even more poorly converted in children than it is in adults. So the problem wouldn't be solved by giving them a bunch of colorful fruits and vegetables, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
And I'm sure that that would be similar in America as well.
Mhm.
I just finished a book. What was the name of that book? I just finished a book called The Crazy Makers. I gave it a mid review. It was a thoroughly mid book, but in that book, they were talking about surveys that both children and teenagers had given, and they were followed around, and these surveys were updated regularly. It wasn't just asking them, what did you eat last month? Like it was a food diary. And it showed that almost all of them were eating 100% processed foods every day. And that's not a surprise to most people listening here, but you know, surveys confirm that just like in India here, if you actually follow what children and growing teenagers are eating, let alone adults here, but whatever, the children have particularly bad habits, they are getting basically zero vitamin A. You know, there's no vitamin A in Coca-Cola and Lucky Charms. If there is, it's extremely, extremely scant. And yeah, vitamin A deficiency remains a very, very large problem that will not be fixed with fruits and vegetables. And even on these surveys and stuff, even adults, and I know we try to eat vegetables. There's no way
Mhm.
I get enough beta carotene in my diet through fruits and vegetables, even when I try, you know, and the average person is not trying. They're
No.
eating cheeseburgers and French fries, and there's
Mhm.
zero vitamin A in there.
You couldn't, if you had the most balanced diet, not that you have the time to do it, but if they brought you the best foods, the most nutrient dense foods, you wouldn't even scratch the surface and get close to what you actually need. It's the agricultural, it's on an agricultural level. We're unable to do it. The soils don't have the minerals in them to go to the food. people they get these ideas like with the Brazil nuts. That's the number one. That's my go-to for this argument. People say Brazil nuts are rich in selenium. We've all heard that one. Well, now the majority of the Brazil nuts in the world are grown in California, which has a historically low selenium level. So now the average Brazil nut has zero selenium in it, which is a reflection of how it's the soil that the food is grown in. People say, eat your spinach, it has calcium. Well, if the ground that the spinach grew in did not have calcium, it doesn't have calcium. It's that simple. And you have the same plot of land that's government subsidized, and it's grown the same foods on it for 150 years now, 100 years now, 50 years now. Where are these minerals coming from? All they put in the dirt is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They might throw some sulfur in there. They might throw a little magnesium and calcium in there, but that's all you're getting. So the vitamins, there's a small percentage of vitamins that get converted from minerals in the plants, but it's insufficient because the minerals aren't there to give them the building blocks that they need to do that anyways. You guys have to understand you are not going to get what you need from food. Nobody is getting what they need from food. And it's sad to think about how many people are actually eating processed foods. So they're taking that already unnutritious food and they're stripping it of what little it did have, and they're feeding their growing children with that.
And it's no wonder they come to us with skin problems and liver problems and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And keep in mind, if a vitamin or a nutrient concentrates in an organ, that also means it's important for that organ. So when they're blaming vitamin A for liver problems here, to me that's backwards. You said it before. Basically, if you have a health problem, that means you were deficient, like by default.
Mm-hmm.
You have any health problem to begin with, then you already had a problem. I know it's kind of circular, but it's very likely that the liver was already underperforming.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, vitamin A concentrates in the liver, so therefore it is very important in the liver, just like it's very important in the eyes, and that's been known since antiquity. I have
Mm-hmm.
one more case here from the NIH. This document only had 3 case studies here. This document is attempting to really lay out how toxic vitamin A is. This is the document for this. So there's 3 case studies here. We already looked at the other 2. This one is the worst one. Okay, so this is a 31-year-old woman. She had psoriasis, multiple nutrient deficiencies, probably grew up on processed foods. Don't know what year this is. Don't know her history of drugs, antidepressants, antibiotics, over-the-counter painkillers, birth control pills. We have no idea what this 31-year-old
Yeah.
woman was doing. We don't know her body weight. We don't know where she lived. We don't know what she did for a living. Pretty weak case studies here. Just saying, I would love some more detail on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. 31-year-old woman with psoriasis is all we know about her. She was treated, that means a doctor did this. She was treated with high doses of vitamin A. We do not know what form of vitamin A, whether this was a drug or a supplement or liver, or we have no idea. 3.5 million IU daily. We don't know if this is a 90-pound woman or a 290-pound woman. We have no idea. We're not given that information. But in any case, 3.5 million IU is like an elephant dose. I mean, what the heck, doctor?
Mm-hmm.
This is crazy. Are you crazy? 3.5 million IU daily. That's nuts. For 3 weeks here. During the third week, she developed. So in 2 weeks of that high dose, nothing happened. But on the third week, she developed fatigue, severe headaches, loss of appetite, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, thirst, and pains in both legs. None of those are life-threatening, by the way. But they're not nice. But talking about toxicity here, that's not that toxic. Considering that drugs kill hundreds of thousands of people every year in the US alone in their proper administration, right? So this is massive, massive doses. And she got some fatigue and some headaches and some pains in the legs. After the fourth week, she developed jaundice. Okay, so liver is severely taxed here and was admitted for evaluation. On examination, her skin was dry and scaly, but the psoriatic lesions had mostly healed. Ha! So it fixed the psoriasis. She was clinically jaundiced and had an enlarged liver. Yeah, her liver markers were elevated. Over the following over the following week, she developed a severe anemia with her hemoglobin falling, which was treated with blood transfusions. Oh my gosh, don't give yourselves over to the doctors. Hey doc, I have psoriasis. Okay, I'm gonna give you 3.5 million IUs, probably in a drug. And when you get jaundiced, we're gonna give you a blood transfusion. Oh my gosh. Thanks, doc. Wonder how much the insurance for all of this cost this woman in this 1 month. Sounds like a bit of a nightmare. Oh, and they also gave her a drug as well. High doses of methylprednisolone. A liver biopsy, that's painful. A liver biopsy showed an enlargement of some of the stellate cells. Okay, so she did have some liver changes there. And then she developed almost total alopecia, so her hair fell out a few days after stopping vitamin A supplementation, but then began to improve. Hey, okay, hair's coming back. 2 months later, she was asymptomatic of liver disease, and all laboratory tests were normal, although her psoriasis was worse. Okay, so it got better and then it got worse. Terrible treatment regimen here.
Yeah,
Stupid treatment regimen here. This doctor should have been fired, but I guarantee you he or she was not fired.
no, absolutely not. They never are. That was 350 times by my math. That was 350 times the toxic level for an adult male, for a full, healthy sized adult male. So she was taking 350 times the upper toxic dosage, what's considered to be the toxic dosage. So 350 times the toxic dosage can yield over months, essentially, can yield some hair loss, a little bit of liver damage that gets reversed. The cases here aren't strong enough to imply that there's any reasonable risks whatsoever, let alone severe risks.
And actually, I think we found, well, okay, at the very, very bottom of this document, there's a section called product information. I'm not sure if this is the product that was used in all three cases, but it is a palmitate form, retinol palmitate, which is supposed to be the form that exists in your liver, by the way. Your body's supposed to store it as retinol palmitate. But this was a generic formula from the company Aquasol A. I think that's what they were using for each one of these. So it is synthetic. Normally, we don't make too big of a deal about synthetic versus non-synthetic. It can get a little bit hairy, you know. If you extract anything or concentrate anything, doesn't matter where it came from. Technically, it is synthetic, but then you can also just make the molecule itself. And in some cases, it doesn't really matter that much. But in these cases, it definitely could matter, especially if you're giving 3.5 million IUs and you're not giving any of the cofactors. It doesn't sound like they're giving any dietary advice at all. And we have no
Mm-hmm.
idea what other drugs they were on or anything that could be relevant. There's a lot that could be relevant in these cases. We're not giving any other relevant information. And yeah, this sounds incredibly crazy to me to take cases like that, and there's only three cases in this document, and then say, you, Tony, should be careful about taking vitamin A because it might be toxic, but don't read these case studies because it might give you some ideas that we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, the strongest argument I've come across is to not take, the strongest argument I could surmise from this is to not take a doctor prescribed pharmaceutical form of vitamin A at 350 times the toxic dose.
Yeah, at least. And yeah, to concur with what you said earlier, this is on another NIH document here. Few published reports of vitamin A toxicity have been published. This is this is top of Google search, by the way, right? This is September 2023. This is we're not having to dig too far here, and it is admitted openly. Few published reports of vitamin A toxicity have been published, with fewer than 10 cases per year documented from 1976 to 1987. Infants and children are at a higher risk of toxicity due to their smaller body size and reduced tolerance for high doses. Accidental ingestion, I said this earlier, accidental ingestion of vitamin A supplements by children is a common cause of acute toxicity. There is no substantial difference in the occurrence of vitamin A toxicity between males and females. However, pregnant women are at risk if they take high doses. And in this whole document here, they go on to explain the pathophysiology of acute cases and chronic cases, and they offer no actual studies. I did try and dig into a few of these references they have here, but there's not even a passing mention of a controlled experiment. where, high doses were given to an animal and they watched what happens. There's just a lot of things being said here without really being backed up. Some hypothyroidism being caused here with, again, bexarotene. I can't believe this in these documents. This document is supposed to be about vitamin A toxicity, and yet they're implying here that vitamin A can cause hypothyroidism. Meanwhile, the hypothyroidism in this case was actually reversible. It was reversible upon discontinuation. And these patients were undergoing treatment for lymphoma, T-cell lymphoma, right? You can see how tangled up this gets.
Yep.
Hey, vitamin
Pre-existing
A could cause
condition.
hypothyroidism. If you're under treatment for lymphoma, you already have lymphoma. We already know you have multiple deficiencies and multiple problems. And that toxicity is not by vitamin A, it's by bexarotene, which is a vitamin A like drug. It has vitamin A like activities. Get out of here. This is crazy. And sometimes they call it retinoid instead of retinols. And that retinoid word is a giveaway that, hey, you're talking about multiple different
Hmm.
types of substances. And most of these, I'm betting, are drugs. They won't tell us how often it's drugs and how often it's supplements. Not easily. You got to really dig into this.
No, it seems like they're going to find any way they can to always avert the blame away from the pharmaceutical aspect and point it back to the vitamin A aspect of it. Because there's not a case here that doesn't seem to be tinged with the guilt of the pharmaceutical industry.
Hmm. And they are actually making reference here to an animal study in the 50s. Let me see if I can pull that up. You can jump in and talk if you like while I look at this.
All right, let's see what else I got written down here. See if I missed anything. Yeah, I think not enough can be said about cofactors in general and how important it is to realize that certain things are going to build up in certain ways, even in certain organs, if we don't have the things that process them. Our body has ways of pretty much purging out anything within reason, as long as you're not, drinking motor oil or something like that. If you're just eating regular foods and even eating weird foods, taking excesses of them, your body will still have ways of getting out because what's a normal diet to us might be an extreme diet to somebody else. Like the amount of meat we eat in the United States or Canada, for example. You go to like Norway, they would think that we were far excess in how much beef we eat. They would think that we were ridiculous. But the same with Mongolia. They eat a ton of meat. Japan eats a ton of seafood. And yet we're all humans and all of our bodies are seemingly able to withstand these things. And humans in general seem to have a way, especially the primal humans, the primitive humans, have a way of understanding. Like with the polar bear livers and the seal livers, the Eskimos and the Inuits and the Siberians, they know not to eat the liver. It's taboo for them to eat the liver. That's the one thing in the animal that they don't eat. Those subtle nuances are human experience, and they know what they need to do to process these things efficiently. We in the West are the ones who are going into things blind. We're the ones that don't really understand why things are happening and why our food's doing what it's doing and why our minerals are doing what they're doing. But the other people, they have the nuance of knowing what they need and how things work. We don't really have that. And if our body has everything that it needs, things don't build up in our body. We don't get excess buildups, even with the fat soluble nutrients, because all of these fat, that's the argument they make. Retinol, specifically the preformed vitamin A's, are fat based and they build up in the body. If you have the water based ones, they're fine, but the fat ones build up. Well, the fat goes through your liver and your liver can process it just fine. If your liver's healthy, if you have the things that your liver needs to push these things out, they'll still be able to get rid of them. It's it's reasonable to assume that even if you take much more vitamin A than you should, or any mineral for that matter that you should, because there's a lot of minerals. We talk about heavy metals a lot. Zinc's a heavy metal, copper's a heavy metal, selenium's a heavy metal, even calcium's a heavy metal. These are all heavy metals. We use blanket words that don't really mean anything. And our bodies are more than efficient at getting rid of anything. And to even assume that vitamin A could be bad in any circumstance is ridiculous. And I think we've more than demonstrated that today. But even then, the best argument you could make is if someone has everything that they need, their body's going to be able to digest and process even exorbitant amounts of certain things.
Yeah, even that website I was talking about earlier for carnivores, it's meat.health. And they were saying, yeah, the other fatty vitamins, especially the D, E, and K, they use similar machinery to regulate each other. So excess of one fat-soluble vitamin can encourage the breakdown and elimination of the
Hmm.
others. So if you eat a lot of vitamin A compared to D, E, and K, it can lead to deficiencies in any of these other ones. And yet, if you were to eat the same amount of vitamin A while also consuming adequate doses of the other ones, it could be just fine. And yeah, they mentioned zinc deficiency as well can hinder your ability to metabolize vitamin A. And this is a very lay person's article here, but I agree with that.
Hmm.
And as I was going through this second NIH document here, they did make reference to animal studies here. They saying, hey, these effects of causing birth defects with excessive vitamin A intake. This was first discovered in animal studies during the 50s, but that actually wasn't given any citation. Again, official NIH here, long document. It's heavily referenced, and yet you don't give me any reference, not one reference on this. I've
Hmm.
been collecting information about vitamins and minerals for years. I don't have any information about toxicity here. I could use a reference, but you didn't give me a reference. You just said it was discovered in animals in the 1950s. Okay. Then subsequently, they say extensive research has been conducted to try and discover the underlying causes of this effect. So I looked at that reference and it was basically epidemiology. It was basically epidemiological here, where, they're looking at a bunch of pregnant women, and out of 22,000 pregnant women, they had a total of 339 babies with birth defects. Out of that, they determined that the women who were taking the most vitamin A were the most likely to have the birth defect there. Well, in their conclusion here, they say the intake of preformed vitamin A, so supplement vitamin A,
Retinol.
retinol is preformed.
Hmm.
The beta carotenes are the provitamin because they have to be
Hmm.
converted, but preformed vitamin A is retinol. Okay. That appears to be teratogenic, which causes birth defects. That's what it means. Among the babies born to women who took more than 10,000 IUs in the form of supplements. But they say appears to be. So even here in the NIH is pointing to studies that are supposed to actually show us the cause and effect here. This is not. This is a correlation. And I'll admit that the way this is presented, it looks like a decently strong correlation. But what else is going on here? There's no mention of what else were they taking? Women who are taking high doses of vitamin A and supplements, I'm assuming they're taking other things as well. What else are they doing? Right? What health fad were they
Hmm.
subscribed to? This is between 1984 and
Yep.
1987. What else were they doing?
Yep. I think Dr. Wallach would always rush to see what regions these took place in and then do some type of research into the regions themselves as well.
A paragraph down, still on the NIH document here, they are saying a minimum safe dose of oral retinoids during pregnancy has not been established. It hasn't been established. Why not? It's been established in animals in the 50s. So, I mean, they mentioned the 50s up here causing birth defects. Well, okay, I know in the 50s that the proper doses were figured out and they're still used today in livestock and zoo animal feeds. We know what the minimum dose is. So why don't we know what the minimum dose is? Okay, NIH doesn't know. 2023, they don't know. But here they say isotretinoin is estimated to increase the risk of fetal malformations by 25-fold. Again, this is in a document that's supposed to be about vitamin A toxicity, but isotretinoin is a drug. It's a drug. It's an
Yeah.
oral prescription medication that affects sebaceous glands and is used to treat severe acne.
I think it bears being repeated too that when the drug discontinued use in pregnant women, these birth defects related to vitamin A stopped as well.
And actually, this is Accutane. I didn't know that this is the technical name for Accutane. So in this document that's supposed to be about vitamin A, they stuffed in here that actually Accutane is estimated to increase the risk of fetal malformations by 25-fold. Why is this in a document about vitamin A? Really?
It should be in a case study about Accutane.
Or it should at least be clearly labeled as that. Yeah, this is nuts. Honestly, Tony, preparing for this episode here, I thought there would be something better to find.
Yeah, I'm
And
almost rooting for him to throw a punch back at this point.
yeah, give us something here because yeah, even clicking on these references and stuff, like I'm just not finding anything that clear. And
Nothing at all.
even those animal studies, I mean, they didn't give me a reference here, so I have to just guess. I bet if I found those studies, it would be stupid doses, like that
Oh yeah,
3.5 million IU with that lady took.
absolutely. There seems to be an underlying factor here, and it seems to always point to something else instead of vitamin A. The case on their part has been made very poorly, and it's very unfortunate that I do see pages right now that are demonizing vitamin A. And of course, it being an echo chamber, we're seeing a lot of this, and I think it's everybody's who's seen this episode's responsibility to kind of put an end to that because you're going to see people now avoiding taking vitamin A supplements, and it's just unfortunate because vitamin A was, if I'm not mistaken, the vitamins were discovered in alphabetical order, right? As they were discovered to be vital, the guy said, "Well, we'll just call this one A, this one B, this one C."
Kind of for the most part, but I think it was actually B1 thiamine that was first figured out.
Yeah, because that one they knew that that was vital in like the 1700s or something like that. The berry, I think they used to call it berry. Now they call it congestive heart disease.
Yes, but the medical world, it took them hundreds of years. They fought that
Hmm.
tooth and nail until the
Oh yeah,
1900s. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, they always want something to be a disease caused by something else. They don't ever want to say anything's a nutrient deficiency. That's they tend to change disease names sometimes. Once it gets to be once it gets to become too known that something is cured with some type of supplement or food, they tend to just change the name of the disease altogether. Like a doctor will never tell you you have scurvy. They'll never tell you you have beriberi because people might say, "Oh, well, I can just take this and that'll go away." They don't want that to exist. They don't want that. They don't even want that thought process existing that you can do something for your health.
Yeah, even though I diagnose on the fly people at the grocery store all the time, just looking around at people. I'm here in Texas. I mean, there's a lot of case studies
Yeah,
to look at. And yeah,
yeah.
I see scurvy all the time. Some people would
When
say
you were
subclinical scurvy. I would just say I see scurvy all the time. And yet these people are probably diagnosed with lupus.
Yep. Oh my God. When you were talking about the instance of the case of the girl with the alopecia and the what did she have before the alopecia? She had the skin condition. She had
Psoriasis.
yeah, when you said these things, I was bursting at the seams, not saying what was already wrong with her, but she was already short with. She already had a digestive problem. Like we just walk by people. I see people with thin hair and I already know what they need.
Yeah, it's
It's
crazy here.
unfortunate. I know. And luckily, there's an outlet for people that actually want to change because as you know, over and over and over again, we get people that see real results and they actually feel better. They actually recover. They actually restore.
Oh yeah, that's what we do. And we'll tell you how you can contact us for that in a minute. I want to round out this conversation with a little bit about beta carotene toxicity because all of these sources here, they're all talking about retinol. They make it confusing when they just talk about vitamin A. They all mention these Arctic explorers. I'm on sciencedirect.com here, same old thing. They're regurgitating it. They go through the possible symptoms here, which we know are scantily collected and problematically collected here into the syndrome of vitamin A toxicity. But what they do admit is that pro-vitamin A carotenoids do not cause vitamin A toxicity. Excessive ingestion of carotenes, I'm calling them carotenes, they usually call them carotenoids, whatever. Excessive ingestion of the carotenoids causes carotenemia, not vitamin A toxicity, which means that your skin becomes yellow. It's usually asymptomatic, but your skin becomes yellow if you eat too much carotens. And they do say here that increased beta carotene has been associated with an increased cancer risk. Yeah, I saw that recently. Actually, I bought a book that's kind of blaming antioxidants for causing cancer. I'm not willing to entertain that at this moment, but I'll read the book and then I'll comment later. But okay, I've seen that meme floating around. But I just wanted to bring that up because it's been well established that the plant form, the carotenes, are non-toxic at super massive doses. I've got a study here from 1985. I'm reading from the book, The Real Vitamin and Mineral Book by Sherry Lieberman. In 2-year studies of rats, mice, and dogs, 2 years is about as long as a mouse or rat lives typically in a lab. Beta carotene was added to the diet in amounts of up to 1.7 million IU per kilogram of body weight. So those dogs are getting a
That's
lot,
astronomical.
astronomical dose of beta carotene. And the authors concluded that beta carotene can be given for long periods of time, virtually without risk of toxicity. That's one. Got another one here from 1988. Animal studies have shown that beta carotene is not carcinogenic, mutagenic, embryotoxic, or teratogenic. Remember, that means birth defects,
Mhm.
and does not cause hypervitaminosis A. Adverse effects have not been reported in people who have taken high amounts of beta carotene for several years for medical reasons. And one more here from 1989. In adults, vitamin A toxicity is uncommon at doses less than 100,000 international units per day. I think they are talking about retinol here.
Mhm.
In most cases, when vitamin A is stopped, symptoms are relieved within a short amount of time. In humans, 5 cases of birth defects have been reported in which the mother took high doses of vitamin A during pregnancy. However, no clear cause and effect relationship was demonstrated in any of these cases. And we just saw a couple of cases reportedly from
Mhm.
1984 to 1987. I'm not sure if those were included here, but yeah, the cause and effect has not been demonstrated. Meanwhile, they've had 100 years to demonstrate this and all kinds of animal experiments and all this stuff. So beta carotene, at least, is completely non-toxic. Nobody's really arguing with that, except for this obscure argument that beta carotene could increase your cancer risk. I definitely don't think that's proven. I will check that out
No.
more. But I do know that in reading alternative cancer books, increased megadoses of beta carotene is almost always part of the program. Whether we're talking about 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 IUs daily, this is the common thing that I
Mhm.
see. And even Dr. Wallach in his book, Let's Play Doctor, which we just finished the seventh edition, by the way, it's available on Amazon worldwide right now. And by the time this is out, probably the ebook will be available as well, just waiting for final approval and maybe even the hardcover. I helped with that updated edition, so you can check that out if you don't have a copy of Let's Play Doctor so far. It hasn't been available worldwide without exorbitant shipping fees, so you probably don't have it if you're in another country. Pick that book up, and you'll see Dr. Wallach recommends in many cases super high doses of beta carotene, which are not even in our products. Like you have to spend some money to get
Mhm.
those. This is medical level beta carotene. I'm just saying, even though doctors don't use this, they use drugs instead. Even if the drug is made of vitamin A supposedly or made of vitamin D, they'll only use the drug. They won't actually use the supplement. But alternative doctors do regularly use mega doses of beta carotene. It's a standard thing that I see in anti-cancer or cancer treatment. Just wanted to comment and throw that out there that even though there is some controversy about retinol, there's very little controversy about beta carotene. Seems you can give them millions of IU per kilogram and they're fine.
And arguably, beta carotene is it is safer. It's like the difference between a protein and an amino acid. You're taking the building block of vitamin A, to which your body takes it and builds it into a complete vitamin A later in the body, versus the preformed vitamin A, which is you're taking a readily available vitamin A. And even then, it's been demonstrated today that even the retinol and the retinoids and there's a million, retinolines. There's a whole bunch of different forms that they come in, but it's all retinol in some form or another. Even in these cases where it's preformed, we've seen several studies of people taking insane amounts of these things and still not having problems. So just imagine how safe the retinol has been proven to be, given that it's from a trustworthy source, and then take the fact that these beta carotenes are even more safe than that. So it's not to say that one's unsafe, it's just to say that one's even safer.
Yeah, and this episode here, we were focusing on toxicity, but I have pages and pages and pages saved about all the amazing studies that have been done showing awesome results. I got one here from all the way back in 1959 where retinol acetate was given at 100,000 IUs for 4 to 6 months, and it lowered the cholesterol levels in people with high cholesterol and hardening of the arteries, but had no effect on people with normal cholesterol levels. So the body took what it needed. It didn't It didn't lower it if you were fine, but if you were high cholesterol, it lowered it. I mean, that's just one example. I literally have hundreds of studies here saved. It
Mhm.
would be a whole nother episode to go through the positives, but I was asked to cover this issue of if vitamin A is toxic. And no, I definitely do not think it is. We could do a whole nother episode on the good
Oh yeah.
results that have come from these studies, but I
We
think
could actually
that's,
take that back 1,000 years, a few thousand years,
yeah, all the way back to
or
them
thousands of
using
years of vitamin A being good.
not only using liver back then in the ancient times, but using they would cook it and you would inhale the smoke fumes from the liver and it would help your eyes. Actually, let's do this. Let's end on this one story here from Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Weston A.
Great book.
Price,
Great book.
mandatory book to me. So this is in Alaska again. And by the way, that study you were talking about, the Ellis Point, that was in Alaska too. Okay, so we're back in Alaska
Mhm.
here. And these were two scientists. I think they were doing a mining survey or something like that. One engineer, one scientist. Their plane broke down. The pilot went back to civilization to get help. They stayed on. They had provisions for 2 years, but they kind of had to ditch their provisions if they were going to make it over the mountains. And they found themselves in a pretty desperate situation. While they were crossing the high plateau, one of them nearly went blind, so violent a pain in his eyes that he feared he would go insane. Not sure exactly what year this is, but this book came out in the early 30s, so it's before that. It's somewhere around 100 years ago. It was not snow blindness because they had goggles, they had snow
Mhm.
glasses. It was zero It was basically an ocular disease caused by the vitamin A deficiency. One day he almost ran into a mother grizzly bear and her two cubs. Fortunately, they did not attack him but moved off. He sat down on a stone and wept in despair of ever seeing his family again. As he sat there holding his throbbing head, he heard a voice and looked up. It was an old Indian who had been tracking that grizzly bear. He recognized this prospector's plight, and while neither could understand the language of the other, the Indian, after making an examination of his eyes, took him by the hand, led him to a stream that was coursing its way down the mountain. Here, as the prospector sat waiting, the Indian built a trap of stones across the stream. He then went upstream and waded down, splashing as he came, and thus drove the trout into the trap. He threw the fish out on the bank and told the prospector to eat the flesh of the head and the tissues back of the eyes, including the eyes. So eat the eyes and eat the fish head here, with the result that in a few hours his pain had largely subsided. In one day his sight was rapidly returning, and in 2 days his eyes were nearly normal. He told me with profound emotion and gratitude that the Indian had certainly saved his life. And of course, retinol concentrates in the eyes. So the Indian said,
Mhm.
eat the head, eat the eyes, and eat the tissue at the back of the eyes as well. Boom, what do you know it? Fix the man's eyes.
Yeah, that's incredible. People pay tens of thousands of dollars to have those kinds of experiences nowadays.
Yeah, just eat a fish head.
Yeah, just eat the fish head.
Well,
The
Tony,
case for vitamin A is great.
say that again.
The case for vitamin A is great. The evidence is great. The case against it, but not so much.
Yeah, super, super, super weak, as we have discovered today. So, Tony, I appreciate you being here,
It's a
and
pleasure to be here.
you are welcome back anytime.
Hey, let me know. I had a lot of fun. I'd be happy to get back on.
Sweet. And if anyone in the audience here is not currently on our program or under our guidance, you can contact us and you can contact Tony, actually. He is on the list of coaches on our website, on the contact page of the website. That link is in the description. And whatever it is that you have, we will do our best, give you our best advice, and walk you all the way through it. If you fail to get your result for some reason, we will help you figure it out. Not every case is as easy as the rest of them, but we're dedicated to helping you. And Tony is very knowledgeable. I'm very impressed. But regardless, all of us here, this is what we do. And you can reach out to us and get yourself a protocol anytime. Just go to the contact page, fill out the questionnaire that's there, and email it to one of the coaches, including Tony. He's the only Tony on the list. You'll see him.
I'd be happy to help you guys out.
And remember that you can find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including the books that I've written and helped publish. and an archive of this podcast. You can download them all there for free. And if you ever come searching for us on podcast land and we're not there, you should remember that we have been taken down before. We could get taken down again. That's why there's an archive on my website. All of our social media links and everything, you can find everything that I do on the website, notusbooks.org. It is also in the description as well. And if you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so on Patreon. Just $1.99 a month gets you access to all the podcasts at least 1 week early, sometimes several weeks early if I'm very on top of things. Right now, I'm pretty on top of things, so get everything there early. You also get access to our weekly Zoom meeting that I do with our other distributors. We go pretty deep into specific diseases and products, and we always do at least one case study there every week. Those are only on the Patreon, or you can join them live, but you can see them on Patreon later. Either way, we appreciate the support. And once again, Tony, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.